Hello, everybody, and welcome to the podcast Strong, Grounded, Unstoppable. It takes many of us a while to get there. And actually, this podcast is all about supporting people who are not there yet, but need or want some advice, some inspirations, some ideas. And I am so excited to welcome another amazing guest. It's a gentleman this time, as you'll see, because I do love mixing up men and women. And in fact, Jim is the ideal person to do that. So welcome, Jim Bernardo. It's lovely to have you with us.
Thank you, Susie. Lovely to be with you.
Now, I am speaking from the UK, where I live. Where in the world are you at the moment?
I am living for the past 5 years in La Paz, Baja California Sur, Mexico. So if you look at the map, the peninsula to the left of Mexico, I'm near the bottom of that peninsula.
That sounds fabulous. It sounds quite sort of exotic. I've never been to Mexico. I want to come. So can you just describe why you ended up, because I know there's a lot of Italian in you. Have you always lived in Mexico, or was it work or family that took you there?
As you know about me already, Susie, everything is a story.
Which we love.
Yeah, my now ex-wife and I visited here about 7 years ago for 4 or 5 days and absolutely fell in love with the place. And when COVID happened in the States, we were both obviously working remotely. And we had talked from time to time about coming down here for a month or so we could really get a feel for the area and the place and maybe eventually retire here. So when COVID hit, we decided to come for 3 months, and it's 5 years later.
Wow. Okay.
That's the very...
Okay. Well, I mean, if you fall in love with the place and you are able to move there, why not? The world is such a huge place, and to explore elements of it can educate us, can inform us, can move us in many, many different ways. I'm very visual, and so my surroundings really affect me. It goes through my eyes into my soul, and it definitely affects. So if you can live in a place that you adore, why wouldn't you? I just want to introduce... Yeah.
No, I was just going to say...
Sorry, Jim, go on.
Yeah, if you had asked me 10 years ago, I would not have listed this place in my top 20 of places I would want to be. I mean, the entire Baja Peninsula is a desert, but we are right on the shores of the Gulf of California or the Sea of Cortez, depending on the map that you look at. And growing up, we used to watch at home The Undersea World of Jacques Cousteau. And Cousteau used to...
Yes, so did I.
Yeah, Cousteau used to come here a lot, and he called the Sea of Cortez the world's aquarium. And in fact, at one end of the Malecón, the boardwalk, there is a statue of Cousteau in his diving gear looking out over the water. And all that to tell you that when I go snorkeling off the shore here, I see things that I only ever saw on that television show when I was a boy. I mean, it's really
fabulous.
Yeah.
Yes, beautiful, beautiful. Yeah. Let me tell our audience a little bit about you before we dive really in. Jim is an author, and I have had the privilege of reading his book, which we'll talk about later. The reason we're so interested in what we do, and because we met in a breakout room on Zoom, as one does, is a trauma recovery coach, a group facilitator. But in the past, you've also been a top competitive strategist, sales and channel expert, ex-Microsoft, ex-IBM, ex-Lotus, ex-Apigee, and then it's got at the end psychology and biology. So it's like, thought I'd add on that at the end. Yeah. So that's some mighty big companies you have worked for. And I know there's a story about one of them. And the CEO of that, which is in your book, although you don't mention the CEO, you just call him the CEO. And there's a story about that because it's a very powerful, however good we are, however successful we may become, if the inner child in us is still unhealed, that inner child's automatic default will go to a phrase which you used even after this. May I say the name of the CEO?
Yes.
Yeah. Or actually, maybe that's a good place for you to tell this story and then go right back to why this phrase that you've even felt at the time when you'd done something so incredible, and why that still was with you. And then we can go back into what your childhood was like, because you and I know very well that that affects us deeply. So, because it really hit me this. So you were very successful with a particular project with Microsoft. Take it from there, Jim.
Sure, Susie. Let me back it up a little bit to
Okay, sure.
what led up to that place. So about 10 years, I got involved with an organization called the Mankind Project. And things have changed in the Mankind Project since then. But at the time that I went through it, the sort of grounding event in the Mankind Project was a weekend initiation called the New Warrior Training Adventure. And that was structured around Carl Jung's archetypes of the king, the lover, the warrior, and the magician, and Joseph Campbell's cultural mythology of the hero's journey. So a separation, a descent, an ordeal, an initiation, a return. Coming out of that weekend, I believed, as a lot of men on my weekend believed, that my core wound was that I'm not good enough. So fast forward some years, there was a weekend when my wife was away on a retreat, and there was something, and I can't even remember what the heck it was. There was something gnawing at me. And so I spent the weekend doing some internal work trying to uncover what that was. And there was a point where all of a sudden it hit me. And as you know, Susie, I get emotional when I talk about this. It all of a sudden hit me that my core wound was not I'm not good enough. My core wound was I don't matter. And the very first memory that popped into my brain is this that you referred to. I was at Microsoft, and I had conceived and built and hired the team and everything, a competitive initiative to take down one of the companies that at that time was one of Microsoft's chief competitors. And Microsoft had been trying to unseat them for 10 years with limited to no success. And in the space of 2 years, my team and I, on the back of that competitive initiative, generated $1.7 billion in incremental revenue for the company. And I was doing a presentation, an internal presentation, and I was approached by Bill Gates' technical advisor. And he asked if I would come and present to Bill about the initiative. So the day came, I walked into the conference room. It was me, Bill, and I don't know, 5 or 6 other people. So small group, right? And I sat down at the table, and Bill opened the meeting by looking at me and saying, "Congratulations, you're running the most successful competitive initiative in the history of Microsoft." And I immediately minimized and deflected. Bill, it was easy. Anybody could have done it. It was like taking candy from a baby. If only you knew all the warts on the initiative, that kind of stuff. I don't matter. And, the fact of the matter is that lots of people before me had tried. And if not for me, it might still not have happened. And
Sure.
Yeah. And
I'm sure. And
yeah, go ahead, please.
This is the challenge. Is it doesn't matter how successful you are, what wealth or wonderful things you've produced and provided. If you don't have that core feeling of worthiness and which all grows or doesn't grow from when we're children, to have achieved that, which is like, oh my God,
Well,
and to still feel I don't matter. That is so sad. But I want to thank you and applaud you here, because as a man, it is much harder to speak about your vulnerabilities, about your challenges, to speak your truth, to even acknowledge it to yourself. And so with this and your book, you are doing such a great service to men and to the people they love, particularly their wives, because I love stories and because they develop an understanding of who we really are, and to be able to speak out knowing that it might do some good. And as you say in your book, if this just reaches and changes the life of one man, I'll reach the end of my life happy. And that's all we can do, Jim. But you are actually stepping out there and telling the stories and saying, you know what? I may have been externally successful, but inside it was really messy until I chose to change it.
Yeah.
And so
The interesting.
tell me about the time when you chose to change it.
Yeah. So, I give the example with Bill, because that literally was the first thing that popped into my mind. And obviously that's kind of a fun story, right? But, along with that or after that, I was flooded with memories of times in my life where I've shown up as I don't matter and what it has cost me to show up. Um, so after I had my weekend in the Mankind Project, also a couple of years later, through a series of circumstances, I sat through a certification program to become a trauma recovery coach. And my motivation for doing that at the time was that, so there are groups of men that meet worldwide, sponsored by or affiliated with the Mankind Project, weekly or every other week or whatever. And there's a lot of training that we would do for men about how to facilitate another man through a piece of work, and scripts and processes and on and on. And one of the things that we would tell men is be careful not to traumatize or re-traumatize a man when you are facilitating him, because we are not trauma experts. So I figured, very not happy-go-lucky, but I figured in my Jim Bernardo way, well, what the hell? I'll go get trained to be a trauma recovery coach. And as you can well imagine, sitting through a program like that, you get to uncover and unearth your own traumas.
Yes.
And there were things that showed up for me that I had buried so deeply that I had completely forgotten about them. And, one of the, well, I'm going to bounce around a little bit. As I say in the book, there's a therapist and author out of the Boston area by the name of Terry Real. And Terry wrote a book, which was the first book that was explicitly about male depression, called, and I absolutely adore this title, I Don't Want to Talk About It. Right?
Yeah.
And
it's accurate.
Yeah, it is. He talks about the myriad small t traumas, wounds that we inflict on boys from birth. And he says to think of them as being traumas is kind of like asking a fish to be able to see the water that it swims in. So, in the work that I do with men, Susie, universally true, in the first or second or even third session that I'll do with a man, where we start to probe some of the things from childhood, they'll say to me, yeah, I had some stuff that happened when I was a kid. My dad was tough, whatever, but those weren't traumas, right? By the third or fourth session, they begin to recognize that they are. And, there's a term coined for these kinds of small, repetitive, injuries that happen often at the hands of a parent or a caregiver. And it's called complex PTSD. So it's PTSD, it's post-traumatic stress disorder, but of a slightly different kind. And, as I was doing the research for the book and, deciding to write the book, one of the first things that really grabbed me in the gut was a statistic that I came across from the United States Center for Disease Control and Prevention, right? That in the US, men are 49% of the population, and we are 80% of all successful suicides. 4 times
80%.
80%. So I then went and looked at, okay, so that's the US. What about the rest of the world? Net, men are just under 50% of the world population, and we are 75% or more of successful suicides worldwide. Worldwide.
Yeah. And do you think this is because from the get-go, women are not allowed to or encouraged to, but we just do express our emotions, be the nurturers. Men are told not to cry. It's wussy to cry. And so there is this stereotyping that is from the very beginning. And because men, I've always said, I mean, most of us, women, use, I think it's 8 times as many more words in a day, any given day, than men do. But also, if we get together, we'll talk about what's pissing us off. We'll talk about what's making us unhappy. We'll talk about no matter what it is. And if men, when men get together, they'll talk about the sport or their car, or they won't talk about emotional stuff.
Well, so there are a couple of things. Yeah, there are a couple of interesting things in there, Susie. To your point, I talk about this in the book a little bit, and some of this came from Terry Real and some of this came from some other places. We treat boys and girls differently from birth. So Terry talks about some researchers that got, 6 or 8 babies together that were 24 hours old, 1 day old. And they selected those babies to be of similar size and build and, whatever, right? And then they brought a bunch of adults by to look at these babies, and they told some of the adults that these babies were all boys, and they told the other ones that these babies were all girls. So the adults who thought they were looking at girls, and remember, 24 hours old, the adults who thought they were looking at girls described them as being more fine-featured, more delicate, more fragile, more pretty. The ones who thought they were looking at boys described them as being strong, well-built, solid, sturdy, right? All they had to go on was they were told that it was a boy or a girl, right? So that's it. At birth, we begin treating them differently, rather.
Yeah, and making assumptions without real depth of knowledge. It's just to assume.
It's not assumptions as much as it is, socially, culturally, across a number of dynamics, we see men differently than we see women. Right?
Yeah.
And we we impose different expectations on men than we do on women, right? So, to your point about a bunch of women get together, you'll talk about all the things that are going on. We're not allowed to cry. We're not allowed to be vulnerable. Vulnerability is weakness, right? Conversely, anger is a masculine emotion. We're allowed to do that, right? Women, on the other hand, are taught from the time they're girls that it's okay to feel vulnerable. It's okay to cry. It's okay to need emotional support. What happens then in adulthood? Well, what happens in adulthood is a woman who is sad or depressed is more likely to recognize that as depression and seek treatment for that. Whereas a man who is depressed will very often present to their doctor with physical symptoms. Doctor, I can't, I want to sleep all the time. And sometimes my chest gets really tight and my heart beats fast. And, the doctor does a physical and says, Jim, there's nothing wrong with you. Maybe you need to do some things to reduce some of the stress in your life. So we mistake what are really psychological symptoms for physical symptoms. Right. And Terry in his book calls that covert depression, that we hide it from everybody around us, including ourselves.
Don't want to go there.
Right, in our unconscious mind.
Yeah.
And he says that the only
Yeah.
path out of covert depression is overt depression. And overt depression happens when my unconscious mind can no longer contain that depression and it bursts forth.
Hmm.
And, some of us will go seek help and some of us will stick a gun in our mouths,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Jim, it's shocking actually. That figure is so high, 80%. Um, so
Well, and you know
with
what, Susie?
your,
I'm going to tell you another quick little personal story because I think that even
yeah, do,
even
yeah,
as frightening as that statistic is, it doesn't
mm.
encompass everything. Personal story, all right?
Okay, please.
Yeah, I self-soothed with food. I'm Italian, so I love good food.
Yes. Yeah, yeah,
Food made me feel good. Food didn't judge me. Whatever, whatever, whatever. And at my heaviest, I weighed 407 pounds, which I think translates to like 29 stone or something like that, or 185
wow,
kilos.
okay, yeah,
Right?
yeah,
And I
yeah,
developed type 2 diabetes and I
okay,
developed cardiovascular disease, and I didn't know it until one day in late September of 2019, where, walking back to the car after having had dinner with a friend of mine, I began to get chest pains. And I remember this like it was yesterday. On a Friday morning, my cardiologist did a stress test with an echocardiogram. And I was scheduled to leave Saturday to go spend the holidays. This was early December, to go spend the holidays with my mother and my brother and sister-in-law because my father had passed just a few months before. And
mm,
at the end of the stress test, the doctor was sitting there and he said, "So you've got a couple of tight blockages." He said, "The good news is I have space Monday or Tuesday where we can take care of it." And I said, "Tom, I told you I'm leaving for the holidays tomorrow." And he said, "No, you're not." He said, "If you have a heart attack, it will not be it will not be mild. It will kill you."
okay,
And
okay.
so,
And you were in denial.
well, I was in it was less denial than it was unawareness. I mean, my point behind that
Okay,
story is had I had a fatal heart attack, given what led to it, that would have been every bit as much a suicide as if I had put a gun in my mouth.
yeah, yeah,
Would
yeah,
not count in the
yeah,
statistics, right? So I wonder how many more men, through bad health habits or through being an adrenaline junkie to the point where you ride your bike off the side of a mountain by mistake in the middle of the night.
yes, yeah,
So many more of
yeah,
those kinds of deaths that don't get counted as suicides actually on some level
yeah,
are, right?
yeah,
Anyway, I
yeah,
don't know
yeah,
why I veered off.
absolutely. Well, no, because it has huge merit in our conversation, Jim. Um, can we go back to because it all sort of begins obviously with the journey through childhood, as to what brought you to psychology, the book, which we'll talk about, and then being the co-founder of 1 Degree Shift, which is that fabulous community supporting humans to make small adjustments towards life changing growth, which is the only way really we can do it properly, I think. Otherwise, it's too overwhelming and we just give up this that eat an elephant thing. Going back to, because you and I both, so many people do, had childhood trauma. And I think it's does partly well, it informs us. It's not who we are, but it is in some respects until we decide to get help. And so your childhood was, and also the other thing is, we think it's the norm because what else would we have to
Sure,
measure it against?
sure.
So although I did, because when I was at school, my best friend, her mother was a doctor and her father was the vicar, and her mother was just so lovely and cuddly and supportive and warm, and different. She was the kind of mother I think every little girl sort of would like to have. Anyway, so your childhood wasn't great because of your father, wasn't it?
Yeah, Susie, it took me a long time. I mean, I'm 65 years old, and a lot of these discoveries or revelations have happened in the last 5 years. I did my Mankind weekend at the age of 55, almost 56. I literally walked out of that weekend on Sunday afternoon feeling as though I had been sleepwalking through the first 55 years of my life, right?
I get that. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, my dad, I never had any doubt that my father loved me. I still don't. And I
Mm,
loved him very
mm,
much,
mm, mm.
right? But my dad had his own set of wounds and his own conditioning that he was never really
Yes.
aware of, right? I mean, the long
Yes.
family story, my father was basically raised by his grandfather because my grandfather had come to the US, as so many immigrants did at that time to, make a life and
Mm,
eventually bring the family.
mm,
And so my father didn't
mm,
meet
mm.
his father until he was 16 and a half years old. So by that time, he was pretty well formed as a man. And his model for what a man was his grandfather, my great grandfather, who, by family lore was a typical Southern Italian tyrannical patriarch. And so
Okay.
dad learned that that's how you be as a man. And
As a man and a father.
as a man and a father, and my grandfather, his dad, was a very mild mannered, introverted kind of a guy, and my dad interpreted that as timidity. And so when he
Yeah.
came to the
A
States,
weakness.
yeah, when he came to the States, he stepped into that role of patriarch of the family. And, we had a very close extended family, my grandparents and my aunt and my cousins. We all lived within an hour's drive of one another, and we spent nearly every weekend together. Huh. Um, but, my dad sort of ruled over the family with an iron hand. And, he would
Okay.
absolutely hug me and kiss me and tell me he loved me. And he would also explode at me over relatively small
Yeah.
things. And
Yeah.
I remember incidents going back to when I was 4 years old, 5 years old, specific things that happen. One of the interesting things about trauma, Susie, is there were some scientists did a study at Harvard Medical School, I think in the earlier mid 1990s, where they interviewed a bunch of trauma survivors and they came up with a list of questions they wanted to ask them and statements that they wanted to make that they agreed with these trauma survivors. And then they put them into a functional MRI machine and they ran through the questions and statements, whatever, and watched what happened. So, what didn't surprise them was that when they triggered a um, flashback of a trauma, right? The right side of the brain, which, by the way, is the home of the limbic system, the amygdala, the hippocampus, lit up like fireworks. That was not a surprise. What was a surprise was that the left side of the brain practically turned off. So,
Okay.
one of the structures on the left side of the brain is called Broca's area. It's involved
Okay.
in production of speech. On the right side of the area, there's a corollary area called Wernicke's area, which is involved in the comprehension of speech, right? Well, if Broca's
Okay.
area is shut off, I cannot give language to my experience.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think I give this example in the book of Mother's Day 1970, right? And and so they say that trauma survivors can often recall a trauma as though they were looking at a photograph, but they cannot tell you how, right? So Mother's Day 1970, Dad and I are in the back of the house washing our station wagon. It's morning. I remember where the sun was coming from. He was on one side of the car, I was on the other. something I did or said or didn't do or didn't say triggered his anger. And he said to me, "Remember this day, Mother's Day, 1970." Now, I remember nothing else. I can see it clear as day, but I remember nothing about how I felt, what it was that triggered his anger or anything. Just remember Mother's Day 1970. I was a month short of my 10th birthday. It's 55 years later, and I remember
Jeez.
Mother's Day 1970, right?
Yeah.
So there
Yeah.
were multiple incidents like that throughout my childhood. In addition to that, my father very highly valued education. In fact, he ended up being a school teacher. And he held very high standards for me and my brother. I have just one brother. My freshman year in high school, the first semester, I had all A's and one B plus on my report card. And I'm ashamed to say the B plus was in English. And
Don't
rather,
be ashamed.
yeah, rather than
Please.
rather than being praised for an excellent report card. I mean,
Those A pluses.
I'm sorry,
All those A's.
all those A's, I was excoriated for the B
Yeah.
plus, right?
This is here where it all goes down the line, doesn't it, through the generations. There's two things here, Jim, because one of my dearest friends, who's no longer with us, her mother was a very cruel mother. And Sally would say to me, she must know what's coming out of her mouth when she's being cruel to me. So why does she do it? Can't she just choose not to? And the thing is, we also, you say in the book, and I totally agree with you, our parents and we did the best we could with what we had. There
Absolutely.
was no parenting manual for our parents or our grandparents. We are now blessed with such an open forum and all the personal development books and everything at our fingertips. The books you've written, the books I've written, podcasts like this, to learn and educate ourselves and each other about humanity,
If
and the tragedy and the triumph of humanity. Because the other thing, I just feel you and I kind of think late developers in the world of, coming to doing what we do, and better late than never. And we've come through an awful lot to come to the point of where we feel ready and passionate about sharing our learned experiences and our wisdom. That I feel sad that so many people didn't have the parental kind of love. I can spot somebody who's had happy parents, because I actually, in one of my talks, I think it was, I said the best thing that parents can do for their children in some respects is love each other. If parents love each other, then there's so much goodness that follows from that. And be kind to each other and everything. So my question would be, where was your mother whilst this fury and this abuse from your father was going on? Did they have a loving relationship? And did you see that loving relationship? Were you a party to it? Or was your father like he was with his anger and everything to everybody in the family?
it's that's a fabulous question, Susie. My mother was never like my dad in terms of that kind of explosive anger or anything like that. In fact, you knew you had done something really bad if mom grabbed a wooden spoon.
Okay.
Because that did not
Yeah.
happen very often,
Fair enough. Yeah.
right? Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
what's really interesting is after my father died in 2019, I was visiting with my mom, and she told me things which she had never told me before. And it wasn't that she endured any abuse herself at my father's hands. In fact, in all the time, I only remember one time when my father pushed her. And interestingly, it was because she was trying to step in to keep him from hitting me with an electrical cord. Because again, he was pissed off about something, right? Um, but my mother said to me that after they married, my father changed. And I don't think it's so much that he changed as that he continued that pattern of, I'm in charge, do as I say, right? My way or the highway, as we say in American English.
Mm.
Um, and mom and dad married in 1959. So that was a time when, it was more acceptable that the man was in charge and the woman was
Yes.
supposed to be subservient, make a home, make the, right?
Yes.
Uh,
Yes. Yes.
when mom read my book before she passed, um, she was crying. And
I'm
she
sure.
she said, "I'm sorry, I never realized." Right? She never realized, not that she didn't see what happened.
Yeah.
She never realized the deep impact it had had on me.
Exactly. Yeah, the effect that it had had on you, because I suppose it was the norm.
Well,
I'm so glad that you got she got to read the book and
yeah,
you got to have that conversation,
yeah,
because I just is bringing up a memory for me, is that when I was 32 and pregnant with my first daughter, she's now 34 now, and I can remember being at my parents' house and cooking at the Arga, because my husband was doing SAS selection. So I stayed with my parents because we had been based in Germany. So I came home to the UK to stay with my parents. And for me, it wasn't a happy home. I used to cry when I would drive down the lane, and it was kind of tears of relief. It was a beautiful home, but emotionally, it was not great. So, and Mummy came in and said something. I can't remember what exactly it was. Like you on Mother's Day, I can't remember what she said to me, but it made me cry. I was really upset. Mummy went out. Daddy came in and he said, "Are you okay? Sometimes the things she says to you make my heart bleed." And my first response was, "Well, why don't you say something then?" And I suddenly realized that I was a 32-year-old adult. Why didn't I say something to her? But that's where the conditioning and the control and everything, and until you get the healing, is still, you're still the child. And so, yeah.
the other thing is that, you mentioned the sort of intergenerational trauma, right?
Mm,
I have
mm,
3 children. They're all adults now. And I remember, telling my wife when the kids were kids that the one thing I never wanted to be to them was who my father was to me. Now, I never physically punished them, or, my father used
yeah.
to hit me with whatever was nearby, right? And by the way, growing up in the 60s, that we called that corporal punishment, right? And it was acceptable and it was okay.
Yeah.
Dad maybe took it
Yeah.
to the extreme, right? I never did that to my kids.
Okay.
After their mother and I divorced, I learned from my children that I had been every bit to them who my father had been to me.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
taken me several years to heal those wounds with my kids. Um, and
Thank goodness you've done that, because it's normal. The abused becomes the abuser.
right, right,
It doesn't
absolutely.
always, but you wouldn't have been like that if
Well,
you'd had a different example from your father.
and being able to break that generational, you know,
Yes,
passing down of the trauma is so
yes,
vitally important.
yes,
It's really
yeah.
interesting.
It is, Jim. And sorry, go on.
No, no, no. I was going to say, my youngest. You have more than one child?
Two girls.
Two. Okay. I will speculate that they're very different from one another. I know my three children,
Oh, yes.
right? My three children could not be
Yes.
different.
Yes.
My youngest is the one who is
Yeah.
probably most like me, my personality, my, whatever. It was the
Yeah.
hardest for me to heal those wounds with him. Um, and I am incredibly grateful that I was able to do that. He and I have just a wonderful bond now. If I don't hear from
Mm,
him every day or every other, I'm reaching out going, is everything okay? Right. But
yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
he is an amazing young man on his own. And us having
Yeah.
been able to heal those wounds between us
Yes.
has enabled him to
Yes.
fully step into who he is as a man. And he
Yes.
is an
And that's in the
extraordinary
book.
young man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I love that. And I love how you introduced that and how you went into that in the book, which leads us to the book. It's called Echoes of Broken Skies, and it discusses society's expectations of what it is to be a man. And actually, you're one of those very special men who encourage people to redefine looking at what it is to be masculine in today's world. And so, when and why did the book come out of you?
Oh my goodness. Um, again, Susie, a bit of a story. So, where I am in Mexico, there is not a community of men from the Mankind Project. There is over on the mainland, but not here. So, a friend of mine and I, who's actually, Mankind brother of mine and I, who's actually back in Seattle, had decided that we wanted to start something up to do some work to help men. And he wanted us to write a book from the get go. And I was coming at it from a very different place, which was I said, we need to get some of this work under our belts so that we have something to say based on the experience of the work that we've done. For many reasons, he and I decided not to do this together. And I decided to start doing something on my own. And I was sitting with a friend of mine having coffee one morning and, relating this experience to her. And by the way, I had also had an abortive start with another guy before my Mankind brother. And I remember her looking at me and smiling and saying, "You're just not getting the message from the universe, are you?" I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "You've had two abortive attempts at doing this with someone else. The message is do it yourself. And by the way, the thing that I do agree with is you need to write the book now, not wait." And so it took me the better part of a year to write that book. And as you know, having read it, it's not a super long book, although, parts of it are pretty dense. Um,
But it has such depth.
yeah, yeah. Um, so the book was a couple of things. First of all, I've never thought of it as a standalone thing, right? I mean, it's part of this whole other thing that I am working on putting together and spinning up. Um,
Yeah.
and I wrote the book for men, and I have a lot of female friends who have read the book who have said, why did you make it just for men? And
Yeah.
as you and I were talking about last week or whenever it was that we spoke, I said, I'm not a woman. I can understand what a woman experiences and goes through in the same way that I can understand what it's like to have children when I don't have them, right? I can understand it intellectually. Then when you become a parent, you recognize that you didn't really understand anything. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
so, so I'm very fortunate to have a very, very dear friend. I think of her as my little sister. She thinks of me as her, the big brother she never had. Um,
Nice.
and
Lovely.
yeah, 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 and an amazing lady. She's Swedish. She's very much a Viking, and she's got a very, very soft heart. She has done years of women's personal work, and she has joined me on this initiative to put together a series of offerings, writings, podcasts, the whole 9 yards. And we're at the very early stages of this. That's what onedegreeshift.net is about.
Yes. And
Yeah,
that is a website, and I'll put those details on there.
yeah. The
I love that. And I love the fact, because I think men and women do need to work together. My two books, Women of Spirit, 2 volumes, the stories about women's triumph over adversity, were not about disrespecting or hating men. Not at all. It was about giving women a voice to tell their story in order to help other women going through similar trauma or adversity. Actually, as somebody said, this also is a book for men and women, because we can only learn by reading about how each other are thinking and where we're coming from. And I remember at the Cheltenham Literature Festival, I was going to be speaking, and I wanted to. Oh gosh, sorry, let me just stop it. That's my partner. I wanted to bring men and women together, and let's put our cards on the table and our hearts and explore where we're all coming from. They wouldn't have it. They just wanted it for women. So I didn't get there with that, but that's why I love doing this podcast with you. I think it won't be the first, but not the last, I hope, because I think by conversing openly and freely and being vulnerable, other people will learn and go, oh my God, and it will resonate. And hopefully that's what I want to do. Now, I'm very well aware that this is probably the longest conversation that I've had. They tend to be about 30 or 40 minutes, Jim, but I think we've got a lot more to talk about. But right now, I think I want to bring this one to a close, so that we keep that depth in there. Please, you do that.
I just want to say 2 things really quickly. One of them is that, apropos of what you were just speaking about, there have been great strides made for women and women's empowerment in the last 50 years. Okay. And on some level, it's a shame that we've had to go through all of that, because, women have always been, our equals, not, what has not happened in that same time. And I am scared by what I see happening, particularly in the United States right now, is we have not, at the same time that we have celebrated the advances made for women, we have not taught boys and young men what it means to be a man in a world in which women are your equals, not subservient to you, not less than you, but your equals. And the ripples and ramifications of that are far and wide. And we'll save that for another conversation sometime.
Let's do that, because I feel, sorry, go on.
Yeah, no. And the only other thing I was going to say, you brought this up a couple of times. A friend of mine who is a full leader in the Mankind Project has a definition of power, which I love. He says, power is speaking your truth with vulnerability. It's like,
yes.
It's a beautiful,
absolutely.
Beautiful, right?
Yeah, it is. And that's what my work is to encourage, empower and enable women to step into their power and never feel powerless again.
Yes.
And that is quite something. We shouldn't need to feel vulnerable if we walk outside wearing something that is maybe a bit revealing. We shouldn't. It's this question of, oh, she's asking for it, but that's a whole new thing. So we'll do that another time. There was something I wanted to say. It will come to me for our next podcast, because and it's about men and women and talking. So Jim, thank you so much for being such a good man, in doing what you're in, understanding where you had to come from, and what you went through, and then turning it into something positive and something good. I salute you, and I love your warmth, your kindness, your intelligence, and your courage in being vulnerable to speak about these things, and also to allow them to move you. I just find that heartwarming and brilliant. And thank you from the bottom of my heart. I'm going to say, where do people find you? How do they find you?
There's the
And the
website.
book.
Yeah, so the book
Mm-hmm.
is published on Amazon. It's only available as a Kindle book. Um,
Okay.
yeah, because apparently I didn't write a book that was long enough to be a paperback. So I may write a
Okay.
second version and add some stuff to turn it into paperback. It's available on Amazon, Echoes of
Yeah.
Broken Skies. Um, can also find me on the website, onedegreeshift.net.
Yes.
And
.net. Okay.
can email me onedegreeshift@icloud.com.
Yes. And you are also on LinkedIn, Jim
I'm
Bernardo.
also on LinkedIn, Jim Bernardo. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. So
I think on LinkedIn I'm James
people,
M. Bernardo, which is my, full legal name.
okay, okay,
Yeah.
okay, but you're not too hard to find, which is good news. So Jim, thank you. Everybody, I hope you have enjoyed listening or watching this conversation as much as I have. It's just a joy when, a man opens up and is understanding and wants to help and support. More power to your elbow, Jim. So if you've enjoyed this conversation and all the others, I'm going to ask you to like and subscribe to hear more and keep in touch. People like Jim and I want to grow this sort of support of humanity and support of men and women coexisting in a really loving way. And it's going to take some more time and effort. So if you like this, please share. And I'll see you again soon. Take care, everybody. Bye for now. Stop.